Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Welcome to the GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Stacy, and I'm here with...
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi. Today, we are talking about Umbria, Italy. Have you been to Umbria?
I have not. It sounds delightful. I just like the word Umbria.
Umbria, yeah. The Italian pronunciation with that hard ooh as opposed to Umbria as it might look. Mm-hmm. I first fell in love with Umbria watching Under the Tuscan Sun, the movie. The whole background just looks so beautiful. And part of it was actually filmed in Umbria, even though it's under the Tuscan sun. It's actually filmed in the hills of Umbria.
That movie is, I know this isn't the movie podcast, but that movie, the way they filmed it, the colors are amazing. It just, everything looks sun-drenched all the time in that movie, it feels like. So, and
much better than the book, though this is not the book podcast either. But just, it was hard to follow with the book of the beauty of the location. So being able to see it in the film was much better. Mm-hmm.
I actually spoke with an author on the book review podcast, a book called Meet Me in Milano, and she referred to it as Italy porn.
Yes,
so,
it most definitely was Italy. Yeah, that is a good term.
Yeah. So, this is our first show together. Yes. We are going to be doing a travel podcast, obviously, since it's called the Travel Podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we're going to structure things so people have an idea?
Yes, absolutely. So each episode, we will be talking about a different location. And then within that location, we will be talking about a destination that you might specifically want to go to if you were to go to that location. We will also be giving a travel tip, as well as mentioning a website that is useful for traveling. Yes. Or planning travel, I should say.
Right. So rather than just always, just talking about a specific location, we're going to try to make it as informative as possible in terms of, for the person who might not be a world traveler, who might not be an experienced traveler, give some tips, give some reminders, just good things to know when you're traveling. Never hurts, I think, to have those in the back of your head.
More information is always better.
Yes. So what about Umbria makes you want to go there?
So beyond the beauty of the Italian porn that was that film, Umbria is actually known as the Green Heart of Italy, partly because of the beauty, but also because it's the only region in Italy that is not sharing a border with another country or a coastline.
Really?
Yes.
So it's like landlocked, except,
literally like the heart of Italy.
Country locked.
Inside the center of Italy.
That's fascinating.
So it's also actually known as the Green Heart of Italy because it's a major wine region of Italy as well.
Okay.
So it's very fertile and that green imagery. And
when I think of Italy, I kind of think of the entire thing being wine region. I assume it's probably got a specific type of wine, of grape.
Yeah, it's a bit like knowing that California is really good with wine, but, you probably wouldn't assume that San Diego is as good as Napa.
Right. Or, Napa produces one kind of grape, and then, for instance, the Central Valley and Lodi produces Zinfandel, as opposed to,
right.
I don't know, Chardonnay. Clearly, I know nothing about wine, or very little about wine.
Me too. Or me neither. But anyways, so another really interesting thing about Umbria, it's known for certain regions such as Perugia and Assisi. Mm-hmm. I know how to pronounce Umbria, but somehow don't know how to pronounce Assisi. But interestingly, each region has its own dialect, similar to the UK, so that native Italian speakers can actually know where you're from just by listening to you speak.
Within Umbria or
within Umbria?
Okay.
So Perugia versus Assisi has a different dialect.
As opposed, but then I would assume there are different dialects if you were in, say, Florence or Naples?
Yes.
But then Umbria itself has
its own
multiple.
dialects.
That's interesting. I wonder how those things develop.
I think it's probably a bit like being able to tell, if you're a bit from NorCal versus SoCal versus, Boston.
Right.
That there's very different dialects between, East Coast and West Coast, but then even within California, there's differences.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So for our listeners who maybe are listening and thinking, Umbria, that sounds really cool. I want to go hear the different dialects. I want to go see the wine country. Is there a specific location that's really like a must-see location, in your opinion?
A location that really interested me when I was looking at Umbria is the Castiglioni del Lago, which again, like Umbria, just a wonderful name to say. And my very little Italian is telling me that means something along the lines of Castle of the Lake or Castle on the Lake.
Okay.
But actually, Castiglione del Lago is the name of the whole town, including the castle.
Okay.
There is a medieval castle that was built to give its owners control over Lake Trasimeno, which is where it's located on. But then around that castle, this town sprung up. And so the whole area is known as the Castiglioni.
Okay. So control in terms of military, is that what it was built for? I mean, usually castles are kind of fortress-like, I'm guessing, but is that...
Probably military, but also given the history of Italian city-states, it was probably also trade as well, controlling who can bypass on the lake.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The interesting about Castigliano del Lago, like Umbria, it's beautiful. You see this picture and it almost looks just not even real. It seems to be an island just floating on this body of water, even though it is actually connected to the mainland. But the town seems to be following this sort of law of threes.
Okay.
So within the town walls, there are 3 gates. And then within the town, there are 3 piazzas and 3 churches.
Interesting. Is there any kind of legend about that, do you know?
I couldn't find one, but it does... Laws of threes does seem at least to be following some sort of like superstition, but I could not find the reasoning behind that. It might have just been, we really like threes and we're going to have 3 churches, but... Right.
Or it may have been, I suppose it could be a coincidence and they just noticed it and said, hey, we have 3 of this and 3 of this and
3 of this other thing.
Let's make it a thing. I don't know. That's interesting.
So also in Castiglione del Lago, an interesting event that they have every spring is the Coloriamo ICLA. Seriously, the Italian is just beautiful. But the Coloriamo ICLA is a festival that means color the skies or we paint the skies.
Oh.
It's put on every spring by the Italian Kite Association, and it involves many bright, colorful kites and hot air balloons being flown into the air, hence the name Coloring of the Skies.
Oh, fun. So people... I would imagine people would be able to bring their own kites and there would be all kinds of activities around kites. But then there's also the hot air balloons. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the festival they have in...
Albuquerque?
Yes. I was thinking, I know it's in New Mexico. Where in New Mexico?
Yes.
Yeah. So fun. Have you been to the one in Albuquerque?
I have, yes. And it's amazing. If you ever go to any sort of hot air balloon festival, you absolutely must bring a camera. It's just... beautiful. Like you've seen, pictures of hot air balloons, but then you get there and they're much bigger than you probably imagine. Mm-hmm. And seeing a whole bunch of them launched at once is just fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, that is on my list of places to see. I have a friend that lived there for a couple of years and she posted pictures and was always just amazed at the hot air balloons. And I don't know if I want to go up in one.
No, me neither. Absolutely not. But but getting to the festival was fun, and you want to go a little early because they start, it depends of course on the wind and the weather, but they do actually start pretty early in the morning and they go for several hours because they have that many hot air balloons to get up. But it was not, wouldn't want to go up in one, but would love to just go back and see that all over again.
I wonder if they have any kind of, I imagine they don't, but The silly part of my brain, or maybe it's the logical part of my brain, wonders, is there any kind of air traffic control, or do you just have to use your own common sense and not run into another hot air balloon?
No. There are definitely people on the ground saying, when you can go up and when you can't. But they have to time it really well because it takes a while even just to fill the balloons.
Right.
And they don't all start off filled. Some of them, as they go off, that creates more space for the next balloon to be filled. So there is a sort of air traffic control going on in order to launch them at the right time so they don't run into each other or, crash to the ground if they take off too early. It's organized chaos almost, but beautiful, swan-like, colorful, organized chaos.
Right. So I'm imagining that it's probably similar at the festival in Italy.
I would think so, yes. But if kites and air balloons are not your thing, when we come back from the break, we will be talking about other activities that Castiglioni del Lago has to offer. Stick around. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Travel Podcast. Before our break, we were talking about Castiglioni del Lago and the beautiful Color the Skies festival they have every spring. But if hot air balloons and kites are not your thing, Castiglioni del Lago also happens to be really good for sports enthusiasts.
Okay. So what kind of sports?
A lot of aquatic sports, obviously, as it's on a lake. Mm-hmm. You can do swimming, sailing, windsurfing, water skiing. But because the hills around the lake are also really fantastic, there's a lot of mountain biking or hiking as well.
Fun. So definitely you can have a lot of outdoor activities, which sounds awesome. What kind of indoor activities? Like, for instance, can you tour the castle? Do you know?
I don't think you can tour the castle per se. It's more of if you just sort of want to go and pretend you live in an Italian villa and just walk around the village, which is beautiful and old looking, but it's not so much of a hotspot city sort of place.
Okay, so it's maybe not like the most bustling tourist attraction, which isn't bad. I mean, if not everybody wants to go to the place where there's hundreds of people milling about the sites that you want to see, which sounds perfect to me. Let's plan our imaginary trip to Castiglione
del Lago. And I might be saying it wrong
thank
too.
You. I got halfway through the word Castiglione and couldn't remember the end of it. So that's just me. So I would want to go during the Kite Festival. What about you?
The Kite Festival sounds nice, but because it's spring and it's so beautiful, you kind of imagine a lot of people would want to go, especially to such a big name festival.
Sure.
I would probably want to go at a less popular time just to, again, imagine, I have no cares in the world and, oh, yes, I do own that villa over there and I'm just out for a nice stroll because I don't have to go to a 9-to-5 job and work or anything. I would want to go at a more down time. So for Umbria, the best times to go are either spring or fall, not so much the summer, which is actually when the hugely busy tourist time is, even more so than the Kite Festival, and worst month to go is August. So I would probably want to go around maybe October when it's not too cold, but it's not as hot as summer and all the tourist people have gone home.
So is it August because of the number of tourists or because of the weather? Is it really hot in August?
It's probably both because the tourists do ramp up as you get from later spring to summer. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people, taking summer vacations.
And it's on a lake, and we did mention all of the water sports that you can do. So I'm sure if it is hot, people want to go be on a lake.
Yes, and Italy is, a Mediterranean climate, so they do have summers are just hotter in general in the Northern Hemisphere, but when you get to the Mediterranean, it's just like, yeah, that lovely weather that makes the Mediterranean area look so beautiful. It's not here right now. It has gone away until the leaves start falling off the trees. Come back then.
Yes. Okay. So you would want to go in October. I'm going to the Kite Festival, and then I'll come back in October with you. What?
You're going twice? Okay.
Yes, I'm going twice because this is my imaginary travel. My imaginary trip, and I can do whatever I want.
Yes.
What else would we do? What would we do in October?
Well, I mean, for me, I would also want to go to the restaurants. You're in Italy. You can't not go.
Yes.
And get just delicious
food.
In fact,
I was reading about the Kite Festival, and it said, there's workshops and there's all of these things that go on, and then it very prominently said, and of course there's eating.
Of course.
So I don't think that you can go to Italy and not eat carbs.
Yes, and for not a very large place, Castiglioni del Lago actually has a number of restaurants. And looking it up, there are at least 62.
Oh, wow.
In this really not large, not quite island, just fortress town. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I might just have to go for all of October just to go to all the different restaurants. Be like, okay, this one today for breakfast and that one for lunch.
2 meals a day. That would, 31 days in October, 62 restaurants.
Yep, I have to go for all of October.
It is destined. You'll be eating pizza for breakfast.
Or, I mean, it's on a lake, so they probably have some really good seafood.
Yeah, fish. And it's a Mediterranean diet, which does include fish and, good fats. Mediterranean diets include a lot of good fats.
But also lots of pasta.
Yes. So we are going to eat our way through this small town in Italy, which sounds fabulous. But what I like is that there are all of these outdoor opportunities. So even though it's October and we might not want to do water sports, it sounds like there's a lot of hiking and mountain biking. And that, to me, seems like a really good way to see the surrounding countryside.
And also to keep off the weight that we're getting from eating all this food.
Well, yes. So we will take hikes. I would imagine that you can hire guides who would take you on trail rides or hikes, or there's probably things that are just in place that you can do. And we were looking on the Discover Umbria website, and they had some of those things listed. So if I were planning my imaginary trip, I would include some physical activity to work off my pasta.
Yes, me too. And I'd also just want to walk around Castiglioni del Lago. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a large town, but it's also not a small town. You could definitely kill a few hours just walking around and seeing all the beautiful old medieval buildings.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, it would be, just whenever I think of Italy, I think of narrow little cobblestone streets. So it would be both thrilling and terrifying to walk on those streets where I could just be imagining this, but I just imagine that people drive like crazy.
I can't imagine you could drive like crazy in such a old town.
Maybe. Whenever you see movies or books that are in Italy, it seems like they always talk about the driving and how crazy people are. So I'm just projecting that on here. But also the patron saint of Castiglione. Seriously.
Castiglioni del Lago.
It's no matter how many times I say it, it won't come out. That's what I have you for. Is Mary Magdalene. And there's actually a church of Mary Magdalene that you can tour. So for me, I think that would be fascinating. A little history. I always love to learn a little history of a place.
Yes.
So I would put that on my walking tour of the town and go visit the church and see what that was about, because Mary Magdalene is an interesting choice for a patron saint.
And for a church, you wouldn't expect Mary Magdalene to have a church.
Right, because people often tend to put a negative name on Mary, and this is a family podcast, so I won't say it, but in the Bible she's referred to as a woman of the city. Oh. Which is just a polite way of saying that word that starts with W.
Woman of the city.
Yeah. Yes. There's also a place called the Fortress of the Lion, and I would put that on my list as well.
That sounds really fascinating. Is it named after a specific lion in the way Mary Magdalene has her own church?
I don't think so. But in my head, it's named after Aslan from Narnia.
I mean, yes. Yes.
No, I'm sure it's just, Fortress of the Lion. We were talking earlier about how this is, that they have the castle, that it's well fortified. They did survive many sieges during their time. So I'm sure they, living where we do in America, we don't have ancient fortresses.
Right.
So I would just have to go visit every ancient fortress because I didn't grow up with them.
Yes. And given that the town is named after a castle, the fortress was probably really necessary in order for this to still exist and not have been destroyed.
Correct. Yeah.
We need to take our second break, but when we come back, we will be talking about tips and sites to make our imaginary, your hopefully real trip to Umbria better. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast. As part of this podcast, we want to look at different travel sites that might be helpful in planning your future trip or the trip you're currently about to take. So today's site is theculturetrip.com. This is actually a pretty new site. They're still considered a startup. But what they do at this site is very interesting, is they do a lot of articles looking at culture from a lot of different aspects. So travel, of course, also, but film and TV, food and drink, music, sports. And when I went to the site and looked at Umbria, it gave you the typical, top 10 best things or whatever to do in Umbria. But it also gave you more information about Umbria as a place and as a culture and what the people there do just in their everyday lives when you're not dealing with tourists.
Oh, fun. So what kinds of things did it talk about in terms of everyday life?
Well, it's got a lot of articles talking about the different things about locations, like their architecture and their food and drink. So, for example, not Umbria specific, but in looking up articles about Italy, it's got articles such as how to drink coffee like an Italian, how to vacation like an Italian, because I bet they do it much better than we do. But even things like 11 things no one tells you about living in Italy, if, rather than all of October, you want to go there forever.
Right, or an extended trip. Actually, that's something that is something I find fascinating about travel in terms of how we travel. Depending on where you go and how long you stay someplace, a lot of people just like to hit the tourist spots, see the things that are the most picturesque. But there's a difference between doing that and really experiencing the culture of a place. So back to our imaginary trip to Umbria, I would love to be able to get to know the place a little bit better. So that might involve, doing the touristy things, doing the tours, doing, seeing the church that we talked about, but also visiting bookstores, visiting coffee shops. Obviously there's a language barrier, but I know a lot of Italian people do speak English, so that helps. If you're an English speaker, of course, if you're not, if you're German and you're going to Italy, that's a different thing. But being an English speaker, I know that there are people who will speak English, but learning a little bit of Italian, just trying to see how what it's like to live in Italy. So that article about the 11 things that no one tells you about living in Italy sounds really fascinating to me, because we don't often see true culture when we visit a place. We see the touristy spots.
I mean, definitely. I would want to know, where did the locals go? Where's the local hangout that the tourist who's only going to be there for 48 hours or a week might not really know about? Where's the best place to go for, a nice deal on a really good jacket or something? Only things that people who actually live there would want to know, because then you actually feel a real part of the location and not just oh, hey, and I did this place, and I did this place, and I did this place. Okay, check it off.
Right, and I have the same picture that every other tourist who's been to a specific location has, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I had my dream situation, because we're planning imaginary things here on the GSMC Travel Podcast, I would create a program that paired people up with locals for trips. So, not everybody would be comfortable going and staying at someone's house, but pairing someone up who lives there so that they can take you around and show you their favorite coffee shop or their favorite bookstore or what they do in a typical day.
Right, yeah. Or at least, in my imaginary place, I would want to at least go to a place for a long period of time, which is unfortunately not usually something you can do if you're just taking a regular vacation.
Right.
But I'd want to go to actually not feel like I don't even know how to get around on a bus here, or I don't even know how to get back to my hotel. Please, someone help me. Mm-hmm. But rather be like, oh yeah, I know where I'm going, and oh yeah, you need help. I may not be able to tell you because again, it's not in English. I have nothing to say there, but at least to be able to say, oh, okay, I'm not scared of everything, mm-hmm. and I feel comfortable enough just going out and doing regular everyday life without needing someone to hold my hand.
Yeah. I love our imaginary trips. I think these are the perfect, and we need to create a way to make them go from imaginary to real.
I would love to go to, any of my imaginary trips, but especially to Umbria, which is just so, so beautiful. An interesting thing, though, you mentioned how a number of Italians do actually speak English, but, and our tip for today, it's interesting that English books and magazines are actually very expensive in Italy.
English language books?
English language. Books, if the regular books you could just go anywhere here and buy at a bookstore would be more expensive in Italy. Not even just to learn English, but just if I want to read the latest bestseller from the New York Times books bestseller list, that's going to cost me more in Italy.
Okay, so make sure that you stock your Kindle, or if you prefer hard copy books, those are a little harder to travel with, but hey, book lovers can do it.
Or if you're one of those people who's like, I don't know what I want to read until I get to the airport. Okay, fine, but then you most definitely need to buy them at the airport here and buy more than enough so that you have enough to read on the flight back, because if you try and buy it at the Italian airport, there's a price difference.
Interesting. Yeah, so I wonder if that is I guess it makes a certain amount of sense if your language is Italian, so
the books in Italian are probably more what people would buy. Yeah,
right. So it would be. I'm trying to think if there's an equivalent here. If I went to get books in Italian, if they would be more expensive. I've not looked into something like that. Not being multilingual, which I wish I could be.
Me too. But I mean, even here, beyond Spanish, finding books in another language is really difficult. Or at least there, even if it's more expensive, it sounds doable, mm-hmm. and without having to, order it online or go to a specialty store. That you could probably find this in a good number of bookstores in Italy, whereas here you very maybe in some bookstores a small section in
mm-hmm.
another language, but
mm-hmm.
and most certainly not in Italian or
right. Well, and I would imagine from things that I have read that there is a decent size expat community in Italy. From various things that I've read, it sounds like, it's beautiful, so
right.
why wouldn't you want to live
be?
there? So there would be a need for some English language books and other languages as well, because it's not just Americans or English speakers who would go to live there. So that is an interesting. So that when I was talking about bookstores earlier, I would go wander around a bookstore and see
find the ones where there's not the super expensive English book.
Yeah,
that would be something I would definitely need a local to tell me. Like, where can I buy this book for not like a 20% markup?
Right, because it's in English.
But also that would be not a concern, I say, but something I'd want to consider for my wonderful imaginary month-long trip to Italy. I like to read. I'd want books, and not myself, also not being multilingual, can't do it in Italian. So if I finish the book when I'm there, how will I get my fix?
Right. But that makes me think of, in this day of online, it's easier to get news in English. I was thinking, well, what if I wanted to read the daily news? Well, the newspapers wouldn't probably be in English, and if they were, they'd be marked up. But thankfully, with the internet, I'm sure that there are English language Italian news sources. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you need your news, you're good. But if you need just a really good read,
right,
you're just relaxing in the beautiful hillside, plan ahead, which is really the tip that we could end every show with. Plan ahead. When you're traveling, always plan ahead.
But we're planners. There are people out there who would be like, no, fly by the seat of your pants, just go and see what happens, which makes my heart contract a little bit just thinking about that.
Hopefully those people know how to read in Italian.
There you go. Well, we should wrap things up for our first podcast. For those of you who are new to the GSMC Podcast Network, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, any app that you use for your mobile devices. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find the GSMC Podcast Network. Just type GSMC into the search bar and all of our podcasts will magically pop up. It's amazing how that works. You can also follow us on social media. Right now, Travel has Facebook and Twitter. So come comment. Tell us where you would love to travel. Tell us if you've been to Umbria. Tell us your favorite memory there. Whatever you want to do, come comment on social media. We thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll join us again next time when we will be talking about, Stacy?
Another Italian place, Venice.
Ooh, Venice. That sounds very fun.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.